The parking lot of Thornhill Academy gleamed under morning sun, rows of Mercedes and Tesla SUVs arranged like soldiers guarding privilege. Between them, barely visible, sat a 15-year-old girl on cracked asphalt, textbook spread across her lap, shoulders hunched against October wind. Her uniform, required, purchased secondhand, 2 sizes too large, hung from thin shoulders. She held a pencil stub, working through calculus problems while parents in yoga pants and designer sunglasses stepped over her shadow without looking down. The girl's name was Maya Rodriguez. Her mother cleaned these hallways 5 nights a week, scrubbing marble floors after students left, emptying trash bins filled with half-eaten lunches that cost more than their weekly grocery budget. Maya came early each morning, not because she attended classes here. She couldn't, not officially, but because her mother's shift ended at 7, and the public high school across town didn't open until 8. So she studied in parking spaces, absorbing knowledge meant for others, teaching herself from borrowed textbooks her mother salvaged from donation bins. Her hands were cold, always cold in autumn, fingers stiff around the pencil, making calculations slower than they should be. She'd gotten good at ignoring discomfort, the way her stomach cramped from breakfast skipped to save money, the way her shoes pinched because growing feet couldn't wait for sales, the way students stared when they noticed her at all, their expressions mixing confusion and disgust. She belonged here the way a stray dog belonged at a wedding, technically present, fundamentally unwelcome. Thornhill Academy represented everything American wealth could purchase: ivy-covered buildings, Olympic-sized swimming pools, art studios stocked with supplies most families couldn't afford for Christmas. Students here didn't just learn, they were groomed, polished, prepared to inherit corporate empires and political legacies. Their parents paid $50,000 per year for the privilege, plus donations that funded new wings bearing family names. The campus smelled like freshly cut grass and expensive coffee, sounds of string quartets drifting from practice rooms where teenagers played instruments worth more than cars. Into this carefully maintained world walked Richard Thornhill himself, third-generation heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, current chairman of the Academy's board. He arrived in a black town car, driven as always, too important for the indignity of parking. At 6 to 2, he moved with the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no, whose suggestions became policy, whose displeasure meant consequences. His suit cost what Maya's mother earned in 3 months. His watch cost more than their annual rent. He'd come early for a meeting with the headmaster about next year's budget, mentally reviewing numbers while his driver opened the door. He stepped out, scanning the parking lot with the vague attention of a man surveying property, and his eyes caught on something irregular. The girl, seated on pavement between 2 vehicles, book in lap, completely absorbed. Richard stopped walking. Students didn't sit on asphalt. Students didn't arrive before 7. Students certainly didn't wear uniforms that shabby, cloth worn thin at elbows and knees. For a moment he assumed she was homeless, some teenager who'd wandered onto campus looking for shelter. Then he noticed the textbook, Advanced Calculus, current edition, definitely Academy property. He walked toward her, dress shoes clicking on pavement. Maya didn't hear him approach, too focused on a problem involving derivatives and rates of change, pencil scratching across notebook paper. She'd nearly solved it, could feel the answer forming, just needed another minute to. "Excuse me." His voice cut through her concentration like scissors through thread. "What are you doing here?" Maya's head snapped up, heart suddenly hammering. She knew that voice. Everyone who worked at Thornhill knew Richard Thornhill's voice, had been wont to stay invisible when he visited, to never interrupt, never question, never presume to speak unless directly addressed. Her mother had lost jobs for less than accidentally making eye contact with people like him. She scrambled to her feet, textbook clutched against chest, words tripping over themselves. "I'm sorry, sir, my mother works here. I'm waiting for, I wasn't bothering anyone, I promise." Richard's eyes narrowed, taking in details, the too large uniform, the worn shoes, the notebook filled with careful handwriting. Recognition sparked. He'd seen her before, months ago, emptying trash in the administration building while her mother vacuumed. The cleaning woman's daughter. The one who wasn't supposed to be visible during school hours. "You're not enrolled here," he said flatly. "No, sir." "Then you shouldn't be on campus." His tone carried the weight of absolute certainty, the assumption that his assessment of reality was reality. Certainly not in a uniform you haven't earned the right to wear. Heat flooded Maya's face, shame mixing with anger she couldn't afford to express. My mother bought it so I wouldn't, so people wouldn't, she couldn't finish. Wouldn't look like what she was, poor, unwelcome, studying scraps from their table. Asterisk stories like this one spread across social media every day, shared by viewers from California to Maine, people commenting from their own towns about similar moments of invisible struggle. They watch from kitchen tables and lunch breaks. Subscribe to channels that show them these hidden worlds. Check descriptions for more stories proving dignity exists even in parking lots. Richard's expression hardened. He'd built his fortune on decisive action, on identifying problems and eliminating them efficiently. This girl represented a problem, an unauthorized presence, inappropriate behavior, the kind of irregular situation that could lead to liability issues if she injured herself on school property. I'm going to make this very simple, he said, voice dropping to the tone he used in boardrooms when negotiations ended and ultimatums began. I'm meeting with Headmaster Clark in 10 minutes. If you can explain to him, convincingly, why you deserve to be here studying our curriculum without paying tuition, without going through admissions, without following any of the rules every other student follows, if you can justify why Thornhill Academy should allow the cleaning woman's daughter to squat in our parking lot teaching herself from our textbooks, then you can stay. Maya's throat closed. She couldn't speak to the headmaster, couldn't afford the attention. Her mother would lose her job, and they'd lose everything. But, Richard continued, something cruel flickering in his eyes, when you can't explain it, and you won't be able to, because there is no explanation that justifies this, you'll leave. You'll stop coming here. You'll stop pretending you belong somewhere you don't. And if I ever see you on this campus again outside your mother's working hours, I'll have security remove you both permanently. Faces appeared in car windows, parents dropping off students, administrators arriving early, security guards making rounds. Witnesses to her humiliation, people who'd remember this moment, who'd retell it as the morning Richard Thornhill caught some kid trespassing, put her in her place, maintain standards. She could feel their judgment like heat from summer pavement. Maya's hands trembled, textbook nearly slipping from her grasp. Every instinct screamed to run, to disappear, to save her mother's job, by erasing herself completely. But something else pulsed beneath the fear, memory of another voice, her father's voice from before the accident, before medical bills consumed their savings, before her mother took night shifts cleaning floors. He'd taught her calculus basics at kitchen tables, shown her how numbers told stories, made her promise she'd keep learning no matter what. She thought of her notebook, filled with solved problems no teacher had assigned. Thought of hours spent teaching herself chemistry, physics, literature, subjects her underfunded public school barely covered. Thought of standardized test scores she'd earned through library books and YouTube lectures, scores that would mean nothing without the institutional backing someone like Richard Thornhill took for granted. The textbook in her hands was Calculus 2, college-level material. She'd finished the high school curriculum months ago. Okay, she heard herself say, voice steadier than she felt. I'll explain it to Headmaster Clark. Richard's eyebrows rose, surprise quickly masked by satisfaction. The girl had accepted an impossible challenge, would face humiliation in front of the headmaster, and he'd solve his parking lot problem while reinforcing proper boundaries. Perfect. Excellent. He gestured toward the main building. Follow me. Maya walked beside him across pavement that suddenly felt like quicksand, each step toward the administration, building a step closer to disaster or something she couldn't yet name. Morning sun warmed her shoulders through thin cotton, but her hands stayed cold, fingers pressed against the textbook's worn cover. Behind them, car doors opened and closed. Students emerged carrying instrument cases and designer backpacks, heading toward futures already secured by family money and institutional connections. None of them noticed the girl in the too large uniform walking beside Richard Thornhill. None of them guessed they were watching something shift, some fundamental assumption about worth and belonging beginning to crack. Maya's heart pounded against ribs, but her steps didn't falter. She'd spent too many mornings on cold asphalt, too many hours absorbing knowledge she had no official right to possess, too many years being invisible while surrounded by proof that education could be bought and sold. Maybe this ended with her disappearing forever from Thornhill's manicured grounds. Maybe her mother lost the job that kept them housed and fed. But maybe, impossibly, dangerously, something else happened instead. Headmaster Clark's office occupied the oldest building on campus, walls lined with portraits of previous headmasters dating back to 1887, men in increasingly outdated suits staring down with expressions of permanent disappointment. The current headmaster, Dr. Jonathan Clark, was a thin man in his 50s who'd spent 30 years at Thornhill, first as history teacher, then dean of students, finally elevated to leadership through careful political navigation and absolute loyalty to board preferences. He looked up from budget spreadsheets when Richard entered, confusion crossing his face at the sight of the girl in the ill-fitting uniform trailing behind. "Richard, good morning. I wasn't expecting. Who is this?" "The cleaning woman's daughter." Richard settled into a leather chair without being invited, gesturing for Maya to remain standing. "I found her in the parking lot studying our textbooks. She seems to think she belongs here." Dr. Clark's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Maya to track. Surprise, concern, calculation. "I see. Miss Rodriguez," Maya said quietly. "Maya Rodriguez. Miss Rodriguez." He folded his hands on the mahogany desk, tone carefully neutral. "You understand you're not enrolled at Thornhill Academy?" "Yes, sir." "And yet you're wearing our uniform, studying our materials, on our campus without authorization." She swallowed hard, aware of Richard Thornhill watching her like a scientist observing bacteria. "My mother works here. I come with her in the mornings because my school doesn't open until 8. I wasn't trying to. I just used the time to study." "To study?" Richard leaned back, fingers steepled. "Why?" The question hung in air thick, with furniture polish and old money. Maya could feel both men waiting, expecting what? Tears? Apology? Some embarrassing confession about dreaming above a station? Her fingers tightened on the textbook. "Because I want to learn," she said finally. "Because the books are here, and I can read them, and nobody was using them anyway in the morning." "Nobody was using them," Richard repeated, "because nobody has the right to use them without paying tuition, without going through proper channels, without owning their place." "I know that." "Do you?" He stood, crossing to the window overlooking campus. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Miss Rodriguez. I see someone who thinks rules don't apply to them. Someone who believes wanting something badly enough justifies taking it. Someone who'll grow up thinking the world owes them opportunities they haven't earned." Each word landed like a physical blow. Maya's face burned, shame coursing through her in waves. But beneath the shame, something else stirred, anger at the casual cruelty, at the assumption that studying was stealing, that learning was theft. Dr. Clark cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should." "No." Richard turned back to face them. "I want to see if Miss Rodriguez can justify her presence here. If she can demonstrate she deserves access to an education that costs $50,000 per year. If she's really as committed to learning as she claims." Maya's pulse hammered in her ears. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Richard walked back to the desk, picked up Dr. Clark's pen, held it like a pointer. "If you can solve a calculus problem I give you right now, on that whiteboard, without help, without Googling, just pure knowledge, then maybe you've earned the right to study our textbooks in our parking lot. But when you can't solve it, and you won't be able to, because you're a high school student who's been teaching herself from books she barely understands, then you'll leave. Permanently." Dr. Clark shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, I'm not sure this is. It's perfectly fair. She wants to prove she belongs? Let her prove it." He looked at Maya with eyes that expected her to fold, to run, to confirm every assumption he'd made. "Unless you'd rather just leave now." Maya should have left, should have protected her mother's job, should have recognized this was a trap designed to maximize her humiliation, should have understood that people like Richard Thornhill didn't offer actual chances to people like her. But her father's voice echoed in memory. Asterisk numbers don't lie, Maya. They don't care who's rich or poor. They just are. Asterisk. "I'll do it," she said. Richard smiled without warmth. "Excellent. Dr. Clark, if you could pull up your whiteboard." The headmaster hesitated, then stood, walking to the wall and pulling down a white panel that had been concealed behind a portrait. He handed Maya a marker, the cap coming off with a soft pop that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet office. Richard pulled out his phone, typed briefly, then looked up. Here's your problem. A cylindrical tank with radius 4 meters and height 10 meters is being filled with water at a constant rate of 2 cubic meters per minute. At what rate is the water level rising when the water is 5 meters deep? Maya's mind went blank for 3 seconds, panic flooding in. Then training kicked in. Her father's voice again, patient and steady. Asterisk, break it down. What do you know? What do you need? Asterisk. She turned to the whiteboard, marker hovering. Volume of cylinder, R squared H. Rate of filling, dV a dt equals 2. Need to find, dH a dt when H equals 5. Related rates problem. She'd studied this section 2 weeks ago, worked through 15 similar problems on parking lot asphalt while students walked past heading to climate-controlled classrooms. Her hand moved. V equals R squared H. Taking derivative with respect to time, dV a dt equals R squared dH dt. Substituting known values, 2 equals pi, 4 squared, dH dt. Simplifying, 2 equals 16 pi, dH dt. Solving for dH dt, 1, 8 pi. She wrote the final answer. dH dt equals 1, 8 pi, meters per minute, approximately 0.0398 meters per minute. The marker lowered. Maya turned around, heart still racing, to find both men staring at the whiteboard. Richard's expression had shifted from smug anticipation to something harder, more angular. That's, check it, Jonathan. Dr. Clark pulled out his own phone, typed in the problem, waited for calculation software to process. His eyebrows rose. It's correct. Could be luck. Richard's voice had lost its smooth certainty. One problem doesn't prove anything. Give her another one. Richard. Another one, Jonathan. Harder this time. The headmaster looked between them, then back at his phone. All right. Miss Rodriguez, find the limit as x approaches 0 of, he paused, typing, sign of 3x divided by the square root of the quantity 1 plus x minus 1. Maya didn't wait. Turned back to the board, marker already moving. L'Hopital's rule, both numerator and denominator approach 0, so take derivatives. Top becomes 3 cosine 3x, bottom becomes half times 1 over the square root of quantity 1 plus x. Evaluate at x equals 0. 3 cosine 0 over half times 1 over square root 1. 3 over 1 half. 6. 6, she said aloud, writing it clearly. Dr. Clark checked again. Nodded slowly. Correct. Richard's jaw tightened. Physics. Then. If calculus isn't, Jonathan, pull up a physics problem. College level. This isn't. Do it. Something had changed in the room's atmosphere, shifted from humiliation as spectacle to something more dangerous, the possibility that Richard Thornhill had miscalculated. The headmaster seemed to sense it too, fingers hesitating over his phone before typing. A block of mass 10 kilograms is pushed up a 30-degree incline with an initial velocity of 8 meters per second. The coefficient of kinetic friction between the block and incline is 0.2. How far up the incline does the block travel before coming to rest? Maya closed her eyes, visualizing. Forces, gravity component down the incline, friction down the incline, both opposing motion. Work energy theorem. Initial kinetic energy equals work done against gravity plus work done against friction. She opened her eyes, started writing equations, showing every step. Force of friction equals normal force times coefficient. Normal force equals milligram cosine 30. Work done by friction equals force times distance. Setting up the equation. Solving for distance. Final answer, 2.87 meters. She stepped back from the board. Dr. Clark checked without being asked. His face had gone very still. Correct. Richard stood frozen by the window, sunlight casting his shadow across expensive carpet. When he spoke, his voice carried the edge of someone unaccustomed to being wrong. She must have seen these problems before. Must have memorized. 3 different problems. Dr. Clark interrupted quietly. From different subjects. Solved without hesitation. He looked at Maya with new attention, the kind of look usually reserved for students whose parents made 7-figure donations. Miss Rodriguez, where did you learn this? My father taught me calculus basics before he died. After that, she gestured helplessly at the textbook still clutched in her other hand. Books. Library computers. YouTube lectures. I just kept learning. Kept learning, the headmaster repeated. He walked closer to the whiteboard, examining her work. This is college-level problem solving. The notation, the methodology, you didn't just memorize answers. You understand the underlying concepts. Of course she doesn't actually, Richard started. Be quiet, Richard. Dr. Clark spoke without looking away from Maya, voice sharp enough to cut. In 30 years at Thornhill, he'd never interrupted a board chairman. Miss Rodriguez, what's your GPA at your current school? 4.0. Standardized test scores. SAT, 1540. I took it last month. The headmaster's expression shifted again, calculation visible behind his eyes. Numbers like that, problem-solving ability like this. Students with half her scores received full scholarships to Thornhill if their parents made the right connections. And you've been studying in our parking lot every morning for how long? Since school started. September. Learning college-level mathematics on asphalt. He turned to Richard, something like accusation in his tone. While we've been walking past her for 2 months, assuming she was nothing. Richard's face had flushed dark red. This doesn't change anything. She still doesn't belong. Doesn't belong. A new voice cut through the tension. They all turned to find Professor Margaret Chen standing in the doorway, head of Thornhill's mathematics department, wearing her typical outfit of blazer over band t-shirt, gray hair pulled back in a callous bun. I was coming to discuss next semester's schedule and heard shouting. What's going on? Dr. Clark gestured at the whiteboard. Miss Rodriguez here solved 3 problems, calculus and physics, college level, in about 5 minutes. Without help. Professor Chen walked to the board, examined the work. Her eyebrows rose. Related rates, limits, kinematics with friction. These are problems from my Calculus 2 and Physics I courses. She got them all right. At the headmaster's nod, she turned to Maya. How old are you? 15. 15. Professor Chen looked at the solutions again, then back at Maya. Who taught you? Maya explained again, voice steadier now, about her father, about teaching herself, about borrowed textbooks and parking lot mornings. The professor listened with the complete attention of someone who spent her life identifying genuine mathematical talent. When Maya finished, Professor Chen turned to Richard Thornhill with an expression of barely-controlled fury. Let me understand this correctly. This child has been teaching herself college mathematics in our parking lot for 2 months, achieving what most of our students with private tutors and $60,000 educations can barely accomplish, and you are trying to ban her from campus. She's not enrolled, Richard said, but the certainty had drained from his voice. There are procedures, admissions processes. Procedures. Professor Chen's voice could have frozen water. I've taught here 20 years, Richard. I've seen mediocre students admitted because their parents funded new buildings. I've watched trust fund kids cheat their way through courses while scholarship students get rejected for not having the right connections. And now I'm watching you try to remove the most naturally gifted mathematics student I've seen in a decade because her mother cleans floors instead of sitting on corporate boards. The silence that followed Professor Chen's words felt thick enough to choke on. Maya stood very still, marker still in hand, afraid that moving might shatter whatever fragile protection the professor's anger provided. Richard Thornhill's face had gone from red to white, jaw working like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find words sharp enough. Dr. Clark cleared his throat. Margaret, perhaps we should. Should what? The professor wheeled on him. Pretend this isn't what it looks like? That we haven't been walking past extraordinary talent every morning, because she didn't come wrapped in the right packaging. She turned back to Maya, expression softening slightly. Child, where's your mother right now? Maya's voice cracked. She's probably finishing her shift. Cleaning the science building. Go get her. Bring her here. Professor Chen, that's not, Richard started. I don't recall asking your opinion, Richard. Professor Chen's tone could have stripped paint. Miss Rodriguez, go. We'll wait. Maya fled, grateful for the excuse to escape the office's suffocating tension. She ran across campus, uniform flapping, past students arriving for first period, past teachers carrying coffee in briefcases. The science building loomed ahead, modern glass and steel edition funded by pharmaceutical company donations, and she burst through doors into the smell of disinfectant and floor polish. Her mother was pushing a cart down the hallway, gray streaks and black hair pulled back in a bun, wearing the navy uniform of custodial staff. Elena Rodriguez, 43 years old, body worn down by 15-hour days split between cleaning jobs, looked up at Maya's entrance with immediate alarm. "Mija, what's wrong? Why aren't you? You need to come with me." Maya grabbed the cart's handle to steady herself, breathless. Headmaster Clark's office. "Now, there's been something happened." Fear flooded her mother's face, the kind of fear people living paycheck to paycheck carried always, the knowledge that one wrong move meant disaster. "What did you do? Maya, tell me you didn't." "I didn't do anything wrong. I promise. But they want to talk to you. Please, Mema, just come." They walked back together, Maya explaining in fractured Spanish and English, words tumbling over each other. Richard Thornhill. The problems on the whiteboard. Professor Chen's intervention. Her mother's face cycled through emotions too fast to track. Confusion, terror, disbelief, something that might have been fragile hope. The office felt even smaller with all of them crowded inside. Dr. Clark behind his desk, Richard Thornhill by the window radiating barely contained fury, Professor Chen leaning against the wall with crossed arms, and now Maya and her mother standing near the door like defendants awaiting verdict. Elena Rodriguez looked between them, hands twisted together. "Headmaster Clark. Sir, if my daughter caused trouble, I apologize. She shouldn't have been. Whatever she did, please don't. We need this job, sir. Please." "Mrs. Rodriguez." Dr. Clark raised a hand gently. "Your daughter didn't cause trouble. Quite the opposite. She's been teaching herself college-level mathematics and physics in our parking lot, apparently with extraordinary success." Elena's expression suggested she'd heard English words but couldn't process their meaning. What? "Show her, Maya," Professor Chen said. Maya walked to the whiteboard, where her solutions still covered the surface in neat handwriting. "I've been studying, Mama, while waiting for you to finish your shift. I didn't think anyone would mind. I was just using time, learning from textbooks people donated." "You solve these." Her mother moved closer, eyes scanning equations she didn't understand but could recognize as complex. "All of this?" "Yes." Professor Chen's voice had gentled. "Your daughter has extraordinary mathematical ability, Mrs. Rodriguez. The kind we search years to find in applicants." Elena turned to face them, and Maya saw her mother's spine straighten despite exhaustion, despite fear, despite years of being talked down to by people who considered custodial work beneath notice. "My daughter is smart. I've always known that. Her father knew it too. He taught her before he died, made her promise to keep learning." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "But we can't afford private school. We barely afford our apartment. I work here so she can attend public school in this district instead of the one where we live, because their district has no books, no computers, no teachers who care. I know she doesn't belong at Thornhill. I know that. But she wasn't trying to steal anything, I swear. She was just learning," Professor Chen finished. "From materials we literally throw away at the end of each year. From space we leave empty every morning. She wasn't stealing, Mrs. Rodriguez. She was doing what every student should do, pursuing knowledge wherever she could find it." Richard Thornhill made a sound halfway between cough and laugh. "This is absurd. You're all acting like she's not enrolled. She can't just. There are standards, processes." "Processes." Professor Chen pushed off the wall. "Let's talk about processes, Richard. Let's talk about how your grandson got admitted to Thornhill despite a 2.8 GPA and SAT scores a full 300 points lower than Maya's. Let's discuss the process that led to that acceptance." Richard's face went purple. "That's completely different." "Different how?" "Because he paid. Because his family name is on a building." Professor Chen pulled her phone from her pocket, typed briefly. "I'm looking at admissions data right now. In the last 5 years, Thornhill has accepted 42 students who fell below our stated minimum requirements. Every single one had family connections or made substantial donations. Meanwhile, we rejected 30 students who exceeded requirements academically but lacked the right financial background. Dr. Clark stood abruptly. Margaret, that information is confidential. Is it? She looked at him steadily. Because I'm the one who compiled it for the accreditation review. And I'm starting to think the accreditation board should see exactly how we define merit at Thornhill Academy. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Accreditation reviews could destroy institutions, especially private schools whose entire value proposition rested on exclusivity and prestige. If data showed systemic bias favoring wealth over ability, if it became public that students bought their way in while brilliant scholars were rejected, the scandal would end careers. Dr. Clark sat back down slowly. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing, Professor Chen said, that we admit Maya Rodriguez as a full scholarship student, starting immediately. We're proposing that we acknowledge we've had extraordinary talent on our campus for 2 months, and we're too blind to see it. We're proposing that we act like an educational institution instead of a country club. She hasn't gone through admissions, Richard said, but the fight had drained from his voice. Neither did half our legacy students. Not really. We rubber-stamped applications because of family names. Professor Chen looked at Maya. Tell me, what do you want to study? What interests you most? Maya's throat felt thick. Mathematics, physics, engineering, maybe. I want to understand how things work, build things that help people. My father was a structural engineer before the accident. He used to show me blueprints, explain how buildings stood up, why bridges didn't fall. I want to do that. Design things that last. Structural engineering. Professor Chen smiled. Do you know what the starting salary is for structural engineers with good degrees? No. 70 to 90,000, more with the right internships and connections. Do you know what those connections are worth? What access to Thornhill's alumni network could do for someone with your ability? She turned to Richard. Do you know what's really obscene here, Richard? It's not that a custodian's daughter taught herself calculus. It's that we almost banned her from campus for having the audacity to learn while poor. Maya's mother made a small sound, hand pressed to her mouth. Taze tracked down her face, silent and steady. Dr. Clark picked up his phone, typed briefly, set it down. I'm emailing the admissions director now. Full scholarship, starting Monday. We'll need to process paperwork, but, he looked at Elena. Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughter will be enrolled at Thornhill Academy with full tuition coverage, plus a stipend for books and materials. If she maintains her academic performance, the scholarship extends through graduation. I don't, Elena's voice broke. I can't afford, even with scholarship. There are fees, activities, things she'll need. All covered. Professor Chen walked over, placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. Everything. Your daughter earned this 20 times over. The only question is whether we're decent enough to acknowledge it. Richard Thornhill stood very still by the window, watching his authority dissolve in real time. When he spoke, his voice came out hoarse. The board will need to approve. The board, Dr. Clark interrupted, will approve what I tell them to approve. Unless you'd like me to present Professor Chen's data at the next meeting? Show them exactly how our admissions process has functioned for the last decade? I imagine several members would find that information embarrassing, Richard. Particularly, given how their own children were admitted. It wasn't quite blackmail. It was a polite version. Mutual assured destruction, dressed in academic language and delivered with perfect courtesy. Richard understood. His shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. Fine. The word came out bitter. But I want it noted that I objected. That this sets dangerous precedent. Noted. Dr. Clark's voice carried finality. Your objection is recorded, Richard. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a new student to process. Richard Thornhill walked out of the office without another word, shoulders rigid, humiliation trailing him like smoke. The door closed quietly behind him, and something seemed to decompress in the room, tension releasing all at once. Maya stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Full scholarship. Starting Monday. Thornhill Academy, where she'd spent 2 months studying on pavement, assuming she'd never belong. Her mother was crying openly now, both hands over her face, shoulders shaking. Maya moved to her side, wrapped arms around her, feeling how thin her mother had become, how years of manual labor had worn her down. They held each other in the headmaster's office while Professor Chen and Dr. Clark politely looked away, giving them space for grief and relief and something too large to name. "Your father would be so proud," Elena whispered in Spanish. "So proud, Mija. He always said you'd do extraordinary things. Always." The weekend passed in a blur of paperwork and impossible adjustments. Maya signed forms, received uniforms that actually fit, was issued a tablet loaded with textbooks she'd only dreamed of accessing. Her mother took 2 days off work, unpaid, terrifying, but necessary, to help process everything, to sit with Maya in the financial aid office while counselors explained scholarship terms, to meet with teachers who would be expecting her Monday morning in classes full of students who'd attended Thornhill since kindergarten. By Sunday evening, Maya sat in their small apartment, 3 rooms total, furniture salvaged and second-hand, walls thin enough to hear neighbors arguing, trying to comprehend that her entire life had changed in 3 days. Her new uniform hung in the closet, blazer and skirt in deep blue wool, white blouse that didn't have any stains or patches. She'd received a laptop, noise-canceling headphones, a graphing calculator she'd only seen through store windows. The scholarship covered everything, exactly as Professor Chen promised. Her mother was working again. Had to. Couldn't afford 2 days off even with scholarship secured, cleaning office buildings across town. Maya studied her face before she left, memorizing new lines around her eyes, the gray spreading through black hair, hands rough from chemicals and hard work. Elena Rodriguez was 43 but looked a decade older, body paying the price of keeping them housed and fed through years of 16-hour days. "You look scared," her mother said, pausing at the door. "Don't be scared, Mija. You earned this. What if I don't fit in? What if everyone knows I'm the smartest person in the room?" Her mother smiled. "Let them know. Let them see what you can do. Your father used to say intelligence is the only thing poverty can't steal if you fight hard enough. You fought, baby. Now you get to win." Monday morning arrived cold and crystalline, October sun slanting through autumn leaves turning gold and red. Maya dressed slowly, fingers trembling with the unfamiliar fabric, blazer heavy across shoulders used to thin cotton. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Same face, same dark eyes, same uncertainty, but wearing an identity that didn't quite fit yet. Thornhill student. Scholarship recipient. The girl who'd solved calculus problems on whiteboard while a billionaire watched. Her mother drove her to campus in their battered Honda, engine making concerning sounds, radio stuck on a Spanish station playing regional Mexican music. They didn't speak during the drive, both too nervous for words. When they pulled up to the main entrance, proper entrance this time, not parking lot perimeter, Elena reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. "Remember, you belong here. No matter what anyone says. You belong." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice, and climbed out into morning air that smelled like expensive coffee and fresh possibility. Professor Chen met her at the administration building, somehow managing to look both professorial and approachable in blazer over vintage Metallica t-shirt. "Ready?" "No." "Good. Healthy fear keeps you sharp." They walked together through hallways Maya had only seen through windows before, past trophy cases full of awards and photographs of successful alumni. "I'm teaching your first period, Calculus 2. Most of the students are juniors and seniors, so they'll be older than you. Some might resent you for skipping ahead. Others will be curious. A few will assume you're only here because of quota filling or sympathy. How do I handle that?" Professor Chen stopped walking, turned to face her. "You prove them wrong every single day. You work harder, solve faster, understand deeper. You make it impossible for anyone to claim you didn't earn your place." Her expression softened slightly. "It's not fair that you have to prove yourself when legacy students never do. But that's the reality. So you outwork them until your presence becomes undeniable." They reached the classroom, large space with tiered seating, whiteboard spanning entire front wall, windows overlooking campus. Students were already arriving, carrying designer backpacks and Starbucks cups, talking about weekend parties and college applications. Conversation stuttered when Maya entered, eyes tracking her with unconcealed curiosity. Professor Chen walked to the front. "Everyone, this is Maya Rodriguez. She's joining us as a new student, and I expect you to make her feel welcome." She didn't elaborate, didn't explain about parking lots or scholarships or billionaires challenged by genius. "Maya, grab any open seat." Maya chose a desk in the second row, aware of whispers starting behind her. Students pulling out phones to check social media, probably searching for information about the new girl who'd appeared mid-semester. She kept her eyes forward, hands folded on the desk, breathing carefully through rising anxiety. Professor Chen launched into the day's lesson, integration techniques, specifically substitution methods. Maya followed easily, the concepts familiar from months of self-study, watching other students struggle with notation she'd mastered weeks ago. Halfway through class, Professor Chen wrote a problem on the board and asked for volunteers. Silence. Students avoided eye contact, hoping to remain invisible. "Maya." Professor Chen looked at her. "Want to try?" Every eye in the room swiveled to watch. Maya stood, walked to the board, accepted the marker. The problem involved trigonometric substitution, moderately complex, the kind that required multiple steps and careful attention to detail. She worked through it methodically, muscle memory from parking lot practice guiding her hand, and finished in under 2 minutes. Correct. Professor Chen examined the work. Clean notation, efficient approach. Well done. Maya returned to her seat through silence that felt different than before, not hostile exactly, but evaluating. She'd proven she could perform. Now they'd wait to see if she could sustain it. The pattern repeated in physics, in literature, in every class throughout the day. Teachers introduced her briefly. Students assessed her with varying degrees of openness or suspicion, and Maya demonstrated through participation and problem-solving that she belonged in these rooms regardless of how she'd arrived. By lunch, exhaustion settled into her bones, not from academics, which felt almost easy, but from constant social calculation, from navigating unwritten rules about where to sit, how to dress, what to say. She ate alone in the cafeteria, sandwich from home rather than the catered options other students bought, watching social dynamics play out around her, the jocks by the windows, theater kids near the stage, academic elite clustered around tables littered with textbooks and anxiety. No one approached her directly, but she felt their observation, heard her name in whispered conversations, saw phones angled to capture photos. Then someone sat down across from her. The girl was petite, red hair cut in sharp angles, wearing the uniform like armor and carrying confidence Maya could only pretend to possess. "You're the parking lot girl." Maya's stomach dropped. Yes. I'm Jenny Torres. My mom's on the board." She didn't say it like a threat, just information. "Everyone's talking about how you embarrassed Richard Thornhill, got full scholarship for solving math problems." "True. Mostly true." "Good." Jenny bit into an apple with perfect white teeth. "Here's a predator. Tried to get me a loan at a fundraiser last year, made gross comments about my dress. My mom reported it. Bod did nothing because his family's too important. So I'm glad someone finally made him look stupid." She paused. "You're probably going to have a rough time here. Legacy kids don't like scholarship students, especially ones who skip grades. They'll test you, try to make you feel like you don't belong." "I know. But here's the thing." Jenny leaned forward, voice dropping. "You're smarter than 90% of them. I've seen your test scores. Professor Chen showed my mom. So when they come at you with passive-aggressive bullshit about not understanding how things work here, about not having the right connections or background, you remember that you earned your place and they bought theirs. That's your armor." Maya felt something loosen in her chest. "Why are you helping me?" "Because we're all here for different reasons, but some of us actually believe in merit over money. Also," Jenny smiled, "anyone who makes Richard Thornhill look like an idiot deserves backup." They talked through lunch, Jenny explaining unwritten social rules, pointing out which teachers were allies and which would judge Maya harder because of her background, describing the various cliques and power structures that govern student life. By the time the bell rang, Maya felt slightly less like she was drowning in unfamiliar water. The story spread through Thornhill Academy like wildfire. Students sharing it on group chats and social media, some defensive of the institution's reputation, others celebrating that someone had challenged the system. Comments flooded in from people across the country who'd attended schools where money mattered more than merit, who'd been overlooked because they lacked the right connections. Viewers subscribed to channels covering the story, shared videos with friends who needed to see proof that fighting back was possible, checked description boxes for updates about what happened next. The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Maya excelled academically, consistently scoring highest on tests and assignments, but struggled socially with unspoken rules about appropriate ambition and visible effort. Some students warmed to her, mostly other scholarship recipients and kids who'd felt sidelined by legacy privileges. Others remained hostile, making cutting remarks about affirmative action or charity cases, refusing to partner with her on projects. Professor Chen became her unofficial mentor, meeting weekly to discuss not just mathematics, but navigation strategies for institutional politics. "You're disrupting their narrative," she explained one afternoon in her office. "They need to believe that wealth equals merit, that their success is earned rather than purchased. Your existence challenges that belief, so they'll try to discredit you however they can." How do I fight that? You don't fight it directly. You just keep being undeniable. Keep solving problems they can't. Keep pushing boundaries they are afraid to approach. Eventually, your competence becomes impossible to ignore. In physics, Maya started asking questions that challenged the curriculum itself, pointing out oversimplifications in textbook examples, suggesting more complex approaches. Her teacher, Dr. Reynolds, initially bristled at the implied criticism, then began assigning her independent research projects that let her explore beyond standard material. She designed a bridge model using advanced structural analysis, calculations that impressed even Professor Chen when she consulted on the mathematics. In literature, Maya wrote an essay comparing themes of social mobility in Gatsby and contemporary America that made her teacher uncomfortable with its blunt assessment of class barriers, but was too well argued to grade down. The essay circulated among faculty, sparking debates about whether they were preparing students to maintain existing power structures or challenge them. By December, Maya had established herself as Thornhill's most academically gifted student, maintaining perfect grades while participating in robotics club and math team. Her SAT score, retaken through school testing, came back perfect, 1600. College recruiters started appearing, MIT and Stanford and Caltech representatives asking to meet with a 15-year-old sophomore who solved problems graduate students struggled with. But success came with costs. Maya walked constantly, afraid that any slip would validate doubts about her belonging. She slept 5 hours nightly, studied through meals, declined social invitations to maintain academic perfection. Her mother worried about the toll, seeing her daughter's stress in tightened shoulders and dark circles. But Maya insisted she was fine, that this was necessary, that she couldn't afford to be anything less than perfect. One Friday in December, Professor Chen called Maya to her office. "Sit down. We need to talk." Maya sat, anxiety spiking. "You're burning out," Professor Chen said bluntly. "I've seen it before, brilliant students who feel like they have to prove themselves every second, who can't allow themselves to be anything less than perfect. It ends badly." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted, stressed, and you're starting to lose the joy that made you special. Remember why you started learning in parking lots? Not because you had to prove anything, but because you loved it. Because understanding things brought you pleasure. Don't let this place steal that from you." Maya felt tears threatening, blinked them back hard. "If I'm not perfect, they'll say I didn't deserve the scholarship. They'll say I only got in because of." Let them say it. Some people will never accept you regardless of what you achieve. That's their problem, not yours. Professor Chen leaned forward. "You know what really scares people like Richard Thornhill? Not that you're as good as their kids. That you're better, and you always will be, because you learn to fight while they learn to coast. That's your real power, not perfection, but resilience." The words landed somewhere deep, releasing pressure Maya hadn't known she was carrying. She nodded, not quite ready to believe it, but willing to try. Professor Chen smiled. "Now go home. Sleep. Spend time with your mother. Do something besides study this weekend. That's an order from your academic advisor. Maya went home, slept 10 hours, woke to find her mother making pancakes, something they hadn't had time for in months. They ate together in their small kitchen, talking about nothing important. And for the first time since school started, Maya felt like she could breathe without calculation. Spring semester brought changes beyond Maya's personal transformation. The story of her admission, distorted but fundamentally accurate, had spread beyond Thornhill's walls, featured in local news articles about educational inequality and social media posts about challenging privilege. Reporters contacted the school requesting interviews. Activists cited her case as proof that merit-based systems worked when given the chance. Critics claimed she was a token admission designed to deflect from systemic bias. Thornhill's administration responded by establishing a new scholarship program specifically for students from low-income backgrounds, fully funded through a grant from an anonymous donor. Professor Chen told Maya privately that the donor was actually a collective of guilty board members trying to prevent further public relations damage. But the result was real. 5 new students admitted that spring with full financial support, all academically exceptional, all from backgrounds similar to Maya's. She met them during orientation week. 3 boys and 2 girls, ages 14 to 17, each carrying stories of libraries and self-teaching and parents who worked multiple jobs. They looked at Maya with something between gratitude and expectation, like she was supposed to have all the answers for navigating this strange new world. She tried to help, sharing what she'd learned, but mostly just reminded them that survival required balancing authenticity with adaptation. One of them, a girl named Ashley from Detroit, asked her directly, "Do you feel like you belong here yet?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I don't know if I'll ever feel like I belong the way legacy students do. But I'm learning that belonging isn't about feeling comfortable. It's about refusing to leave when people want you gone." By March, Maya had developed enough confidence to push boundaries more aggressively. When Professor Chen assigned a research project on any mathematical topic, Maya chose income inequality and used calculus to model wealth distribution patterns in America. Her presentation included graphs showing exponential growth in CEO compensation versus stagnant wages for workers, mathematical proof that current trends were unsustainable, and a detailed analysis of how educational access correlated with economic mobility. The presentation made several students visibly uncomfortable. One boy whose father was a hedge fund manager challenged her methodology. Maya calmly walked him through her calculations, showing how she'd accounted for every variable he suggested, until he had no more objections and sat down red-faced. Professor Chen gave her perfect marks and told her privately, "That's exactly what I hoped you'd do. Use your gifts to illuminate truth, even when truth is uncomfortable." Maya's mother attended parent-teacher conferences in April, taking a rare evening off work. She sat in the same leather chairs where Richard Thornhill had once proclaimed her daughter didn't belong, and listened to teachers describe Maya's exceptional performance, her leadership in clubs, her positive influence on other scholarship students. Elena Rodriguez cried quietly while they talked, years of worry and exhaustion momentarily relieved by proof that her sacrifices had produced something extraordinary. On the way home, driving through streets that separated Thornhill's wealth from their neighborhood's poverty, Elena spoke quietly. "Your father would be so proud. Not just because you're smart, he always knew that, but because you're using it to help people, to fight for others like us. That was always his dream for you." Maya reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm going to keep fighting, Mama. For you, for the other scholarship kids, for everyone who gets overlooked because they don't have the right address or last name. I promise." May brought college visits for juniors and seniors, but recruiters made exceptions for Maya. She toured MIT's campus, met with professors researching structural engineering and applied mathematics, sat in on lectures that made her brain light up with possibility. Stanford flew her out to California, where she walked through innovation labs and talked with students building companies and solving problems she hadn't known existed. Caltech offered early admission, with full funding, contingent only on finishing high school. But Maya kept thinking about Thornhill, about the 5 new scholarship students learning to navigate spaces that didn't want them, about the systems that still needed changing. In June, at the year-end assembly where awards were announced, she received the mathematics department's highest honor and the physics department's innovation prize. When called to the stage to accept, She looked out at an auditorium full of students and teachers and board members, at her mother in the back row crying again, and made a decision. "Thank you for these awards," she said into the microphone, voice steady despite nerves. "A year ago, I was studying in your parking lot, teaching myself from borrowed textbooks, invisible to almost everyone here. I'm standing here now because one person, Professor Chen, chose to see potential instead of poverty, chose to fight for fairness instead of accepting the status quo." She paused, scanning faces in the crowd. Richard Thornhill sat in the third row, expression carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I've learned this year that merit isn't always enough. That talent can be overlooked if it comes wrapped in the wrong circumstances. But I've also learned that institutions can change when people inside them decide to fight. This scholarship program exists because someone chose to acknowledge that exclusion was wrong. Other students have opportunities now because people like Professor Chen refuse to accept that wealth should determine worth." Maya held up the awards, crystal catching light. "I'm accepting these not just for myself, but for every student who's been told they don't belong, who've taught themselves in libraries and parking lots, who fought for education others take for granted. And I'm committing that when I leave Thornhill, I'll work to build systems where students like me don't have to fight so hard just to access what should be a basic right. Where learning isn't a privilege you buy, but a door open to everyone willing to walk through." The applause started tentatively, then built, students and teachers rising to their feet. Not everyone. Some families sat rigid, clearly uncomfortable with the implied criticism, but enough to matter. Professor Chen was crying openly. Janitor was grinning. The 5 new scholarship students looked at Maya like she'd just given them permission to take up space unapologetically. Richard Thornhill left during the applause, walking out of the auditorium without looking back. Maya watched him go without satisfaction or regret, just acknowledgement that some people would never change, and that wasn't her responsibility. Later that summer, Maya accepted MIT's offer for early admission, committing to start after graduating Thornhill at 16. But she also accepted a position on Thornhill's scholarship committee, the youngest member by decades, voting on which students would receive funding for next year. In committee meetings, she pushed for aggressive expansion of the program, for outreach to schools in poor districts, for eliminating legacy preferences that gave automatic advantages to wealthy families. Some board members resisted, but Professor Chen had compiled data showing that scholarship students consistently outperformed legacy admits academically, that diversity of background correlated with innovation and problem-solving, that Thornhill's reputation was improving precisely because they'd started valuing merit over money. The data was undeniable, and slowly, reluctantly, policies began to shift. By the time Maya graduated at 16, Thornhill Academy had admitted 30 scholarship students from low-income backgrounds. The parking lot where she'd once studied on asphalt now included a covered study area with benches and tables, explicitly designated for students who arrived early or stayed late. The plaque dedicating the space read, "For those who seek knowledge wherever they can find it." Maya's mother attended graduation in a new dress, bought for the occasion, tears streaming down her face as her daughter walked across the stage to receive a diploma with highest honors. The valedictorian speech Maya gave was brief, focused not on her own achievements, but on the students who'd come after her, the ones who'd benefit from doors she'd helped force open. She ended with words her father had spoken to her years ago, before the accident, when he'd shown her blueprints and explained how structures held together under pressure. Engineers don't build things to stand still. We build them to bear weight, to flex under stress, to support more than themselves. That's what education should do. Not just elevate individuals, but create structures strong enough to lift everyone. At the reception afterward, wealthy families in expensive clothes mingled with scholarship students' working-class parents, the mixing awkward but present. Maya stood with her mother, accepting congratulations, watching younger students approach to thank her for making space for them. Janitor hugged her hard and whispered, "You changed this place. Never forget that." Professor Chen pulled Maya aside before she left. "I'm retiring next year. I recommended you for my seat on the board after you finish undergrad. They'll fight it. You'll be too young, too radical, too threatening to comfortable traditions. But I think you'll win. And when you do, you'll have real power to make changes permanent." Maya looked around the reception hall, at the portraits of previous administrators staring down with their assumptions about who deserved access to education, at the new scholarship students laughing together near the punch bowl, at her mother talking with other parents in Spanish and English. She thought about parking lots and whiteboard problems, about billionaires who'd assumed poverty meant powerlessness, about systems that bent when pushed hard enough. "I'll keep fighting," she promised Professor Chen. "Not just for me, but for everyone who comes after. For every student studying in parking lots, teaching themselves from borrowed books, refusing to believe that circumstances determine destiny." Professor Chen smiled. "I know you will. That's why I fought for you in the first place." 5 years later, Maya Rodriguez graduated from MIT with degrees in structural engineering and applied mathematics, job offers from every major firm in the country, and a reputation for solving impossible problems through innovative approaches. She turned them all down and founded a nonprofit dedicated to building free educational centers in low-income neighborhoods, spaces equipped with computers and tutors and advanced materials, funded by donations from tech companies and guilty billionaires. The first center opened in her old neighborhood, across from the public high school she'd attended briefly before Thornhill. Her mother cut the ribbon, hands still rough from custodial work she'd finally been able to quit, and Maya watched students pour through doors into possibility that should have been theirs all along. The spaces filled quickly with teenagers like she'd been, brilliant and desperate and fierce, teaching themselves whatever they could access, refusing to accept that poverty should limit potential. Maya hired instructors, many of them former scholarship students from Thornhill and similar schools, people who understood what it meant to fight for education. She built curriculum around real-world problems, structural engineering projects that improved community infrastructure, mathematical modeling that analyzed social inequality. She thought often about that morning in Thornhill's parking lot, about Richard Thornhill's assumption that she didn't belong, about the challenge that had changed everything. Years of struggle and transformation had grown from that moment, ripples spreading outward to touch hundreds of students who'd never had to sit on cold asphalt teaching themselves from borrowed books. The work wasn't finished. Wouldn't be finished in her lifetime, probably. But every student who walked through doors she'd helped force open, every young person who learned to see their own potential despite circumstances designed to obscure it, every system that bent slightly toward justice, those were victories worth celebrating. Worth, Maya had learned, wasn't something you inherited or purchased. It was something you demonstrated through refusing to accept limits others imposed, through fighting for those who came after you, through building structures strong enough to support more than yourself. She'd spent a morning in a parking lot solving calculus problems, and a billionaire had tried to make her disappear. Instead, she'd made herself impossible to ignore. And in doing so, she'd made space for others to be seen. That was the real transformation, not personal triumph, but collective elevation. Not just escaping poverty, but building ladders for everyone else to climb. Not just surviving exclusion, but dismantling the systems that created it. Maya Rodriguez, once invisible in a parking lot, now impossible to overlook. Fighting still, always fighting, for a world where students like her didn't have to fight quite so hard.